We open with a viewer's viewing tip. There are long myths and allegories and short ones. There are deep ones and shallow ones, simple ones and more complex ones. But constant throughout it all is one plain fact. If you knew what the hell I'm already talking about, you wouldn't need no damn penny-ass viewer's tip. And we'd like to extend our warmest and heartiest welcomes to all the new stations joining us tonight. The unnoted relationship between the brain and the mind, and fashion and fashion. You can either wear clothing made of naturally crinkled materials and thus never have to press them, or move to a land where the background itself is wrinkled. See what I meant? Alert viewers don't need a mental marital aid to follow this. And a grumper viewer writes, you one time said that thinking is fun. And I'd just like to say, maybe the way you do it. And in spite of my opening remarks, maybe we should offer up this little item that was already prepared. Anyway, it was entitled, Things You Should Remember As You Watch Our Show. Only those who take crap seriously take criticism of crap seriously. All systems are no better and no worse than the people running them, which, men knowing this, is why all systems establish written rules controlling their operations, so as to remove the human element, which can be capricious and inequitable. And as with all things civilized and rational, this sounds fine, unless you actually think about it for more than 3 seconds. A real knight on the true mystical quest is always his own system and rules. And anything less than that leaves one fighting dragons. And we all know that dragons don't actually exist. After another quarrel, 2 lovers talked. Life is too short for us to suffer like this. And the other one replied, no, life is too long for us to suffer like this. Too short, too long, too short, too long. And do you get the point? That is far beyond any notions of rhetorical irony. Words, what a beautiful concept. Words and man, what a compass do we alone hold. One man who periodically felt as though he should be improving himself thought, well, if I don't do something, my anger is going to be the death of me. And his stomach chuckled and told him, don't sweat it. Cancer will get you first. And the man felt a lot better. A father told his son, people aren't necessarily as stupid as they may first appear. For instance, men know full well that their own minds will never explain what life's about. So they've tacitly agreed to the collective make-believe that there are books, not their own puny intellects, which have such answers. And to himself the kid thought, yeah, let's see a hippo do that. A man asked, is part of civilization's job to make life seem more challenging than it actually is? Fashion doesn't mean much unless you're there at the time. Well, I say, old man, but do you mean clothes or Christianity? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. As an example of how undeserving this one king was of his position, he would only attack his neighbors when he was drunk or extremely upset. What a pisser of a monarch. And one, I might add, who rules tiny kingdoms far and wide. A man visited a famous sage and said to him, the reason I haven't come and studied with you is that I suspect a horse old, ordinary, and weary enough will eventually appear to perform as well as one young and trained. And the mythical one asked, and how old and weary are you now? And the man replied, well, I prefer not to say, at least I have to think about it and give myself the, are you sure the last train's left blues. So the sage just smiled and as a farewell gift handed the man a picture of a trans-dimensional merry-go-round filled with all manner of marvelous creatures to be ridden both now, in the past, and off the edge of the print right into the future. Marginal moral. Wait long enough and things that can come will come. But true entertaining enlightenment is mostly a matter of timing. Outside the annals of routine recorded history rests the fact that the original idea for poison arose as a reaction among certain knights just before they worked the bugs out to the possibility of there being tie scores and jousting bouts. Zeus never had to threaten real warriors with punishment after death. All he had to do was wave at them the potential of a life not lived to the extreme. One man asked, how come the collective can make you sick but can't make you well? If you act more important than you really are, one of two things will occur. You will either begin believing that you are more important, or else other people will begin to treat you as though you are, or else you'll just look like a complete idiot. But hey, either way, I always say, when civilization is working properly, its people daily engage in rituals which seem hit or miss in their efficacy, and even whose original purpose is now forgotten. Not unlike, from one view, the blind runnings of a fish school, but without the attendant chatter. A man with City Hall walked with a placard that announced, temporary things give only temporary pleasures. But what the hell do you bozos think life's about anyway? No. Daddy, does that imply that a permanent mind would be permanently satisfied? Wow, son, good question. Those who offer mythical help to the general public are themselves asking for it. Talk. A mental word game men play at odd moments. The physics of theology or the theology of physics, take your choice. Up made up the idea of down, same as good did evil and God did Satan, once man's mind had invented them all. All public rulers soon realize that to hold power they must concoct an enemy for the people to oppose, or else there will not be sufficient dynamics in play to bind together the elements necessary to even have a collective public life. Some con game news. The bigger the scam, the more important the trappings. Just look at civilization. The fear that real mythical knights must overcome is not physical, but emotional, and not based out there, but in here. Here where the true adventure waits. Men were not the first creatures on earth to try and construct a psychological model of themselves so as to understand themselves. Hippos tried it first, but soon gave it up as a useless endeavor. There was once a planet of automobiles, and they eventually learned how to start themselves. All originally considered this to be a great step forward, but soon some began bemoaning what they'd done. Moral. There ain't no moral. Anyone who can find fault can be a critic. And one who can find fault and make you believe that it was your fault, well, they may have a future as a public official. All rituals were originally entertaining, but once they outlived their names, they become nonsensically serious. Out of His Grace's hearing, the royal keeper of etiquette once said that a man who would write a second volume of his autobiography would pee in a fire truck's gas tank. When he made this statement, he didn't know that at that very moment, a herd of trained horses was wildly trampling on his freshly painted potato garden, and no viewer wrote in about this one. A man asked, if we weren't constantly talking and arguing about civilization, you think it might go away? Conversation overheard at a local tango palace. Anyone who believes in the philosophy of I'm okay, you're okay, ain't okay. Yeah, but then again, anyone who's actually bound to any systemic mindset's not okay anyway. Would you care to dance? Doesn't the fact that you can learn something from the words of others that they themselves didn't understand give you some hint as to the basic nature of words? Yeah. Didn't hear any applause from the literary corner, from the Authors Guild. The Authors Guildings. The ordinary's need for intellectual entertainment is reflected in their physical counterpart. To wit, they will again and again watch men play a game wherein the same action repeats itself time after time. In a like manner do they passively accept what little mental sport they do pursue. In pre-Vedic times did the great civilized mystic and urban showman, P.T. Zoroaster, set down the basic requirements for the masses to subsequently follow. His path of the three great precepts, CEM, custom, expectation, and monotony, sometimes known simply as the way of habit, habit, habit. The reporter's first question to the important public figure was, what would you do if you were in a coma? Okay. Okay, the good news, the bad news, and our semi-annual bed and linen sale. Trying to become your own creative, conscious individual is like one fish attempting to not only escape the school itself, but also the net of their collective realities and perceptions, and ultimately the apparent dependence on what they call water. The difference between a mythical knight and a crazy person is that a crazy person is crazy. The mind. Imperfect eyeglasses through which men attempt to think. A boy inquired of his father, which is the greater impairment to mental clarity, drugs or opinions? And the elder replied, I am obliged by civilization to say, drugs. No. One reason men insist that their ideas of God come from the permanency of the written word is that they are well aware of their unpredictable neural condition due to their ever-changing physical needs. Okay, put it to you in a different allegorical setting. If the body itself could conjure up supernatural images, it would picture the transcendental as the universe's most astounding sex, meal, or 6K run. Sometimes, when this one man would begin to feel frightened and helpless, he'd hear a voice that said, wait a minute, and I'll check the monitors. Question. How can you tell that a knight is lost? He starts acting seriously. How can you tell that a wise man's about to die? He starts wanting to argue. What is the difference between shipbuilding and map making? Same as between a knight with hemorrhoids who rides on just the same and one who stays home till he can get some treatment. Daddy, would a mythical tale like that ever lie to us? Well, I don't know, son, but why would it? Okay, an easy one. What's the difference in being ordinary and not being? Whatever the ordinary says it is. One day a kid asked his dog, what does it take to be a public figure? And the dog knew the answer. A really loud bark and loads of testosterone. Of course, he left out low IQ, but hey, he's just a dog. In case you're interested, during their own time, there were 3 versions of every famous historical mystic. And if they lived long enough, 4. One man wondered, what if, in an unbiased manner, I finally think of everything that can be thought of, what will I think of then? How come more people like that can't be viewers? The uncivilized die but once. But the drawback to this is that they never live but half a life to start with. Looking up from the book spread on the table before him, a man thought, the many tales of mystical adventures and spiritual quest are indeed fascinating until you realize the origins of them all. And the librarian said, shh, don't think so loud. The crown prince of one kingdom had secretly tattooed on his upper arm these words, a serious man is a goddamned pathetic man. And next to this, he had surgically implanted a little mirror. From one ad hoc view, the whole notion of a mystical tradition came from would-be knights of the past, themselves fairly alert and anxious, who feared there might not actually be a tradition. People live in cities for the same reason they live in each other's thoughts. A viewer asked, isn't all of this mystical tradition stuff little more than taking everyday existence, which is already unnecessarily too complicated, and just making it more so? And though I doubt 'twas his intention, that comes darn close to a quite adequate description. A mother told her child, once you recognize the glue that holds all this together, you realize there is no such glue. Magazines have letters to the editor section for the same reason people say, you know. Reporters report on the job of reporting because of the monotony of the news. You know. Men believe that collectively they know the truth so they won't have to face up to them not individually. And lastly, due to all of the above, do knights insist on being knights no matter what the hell it ever amounts to? A viewer writes, would you please explain the connection you intend between your metaphorical use of the two terms, the king and a knight? And please excuse the starry state of this letter, but the envelope exploded in my face as I was licking it. Just for a slight shift in scenery. From one view, you could say that the mystical adventure is a struggle between the force of the collective and an individual's desire to be an individual. A true knight derives no moral from what he accomplishes. Daddy, is that why it's so quiet around here? As regards the mystical tradition, do remember that at any particular contemporary time, it is not a tradition, but always a neo-tradition. Historical sidebar. A knight living amongst the civilized was the original inspiration for the notion of a wolf in sheep's clothing. One kid came to the conclusion that if people were any simpler, he'd be his own kid. The head of the order told a neophyte, leave it to the crown and the crowds to debate the existence of free will. A knight knows that he has none, and has only that which he has no choice but to do. You can stare at reality. The trick is to get to stare back at you. A knight has but one weapon, his mind. A knight has but one armor, his mind. A knight has but one steed, his mind, and that pretty well covers it. A piece. I was going to try to thread through all of this. We'll steal it right out of the newspapers. Right from the front page, and I know that many of you will be familiar with this, if not shocked by it. It said March 28th, 19... Okay. All right, I'll be serious. recent discussions, very recent, and a quite serious, well-dressed, well-mannered, well-educated social commentator, political observer, sociological observer, I guess I should point out also. The people are talking about some of the unpleasantness that's been going on in a certain part of the world, armed conflict. And there is a temporary cessation of the overt hostilities. And one of the reporters, the man I was going to quote, he says, "Isn't that something?" He says, "They have now been fighting nonstop there in that city, that area, for 2 years every day. So many people have been killed, so many children rendered homeless and lamed. The ceasefire has been in effect 2 days. They were mortal enemies for over 2 years. And you know what they were doing yesterday? The two sides, part of the armies that they were putting up just as peacekeepers, were out there, cleaned it out, makeshift soccer field. They're out there playing soccer." And he comments on the miraculous, resilient nature of the human spirit. You all got that, right? Now that would sound to be a very astute, a very up-to-date, a very enlightened, a very humane, a very insightful comment. To say, is it not miraculous that the human spirit can bounce back like that? That they were killing each other 2 days ago, been going on for years, and now they're out there playing a friendly game of soccer. Since we're not engaged in ordinary political commentary and not dealing with ordinary brains, I put it to you a more potentially delicious and nourishing way. What's amazing is, from one view, is why men have to say, why someone has to point out, is that not the miraculous display of the resiliency of the human spirit? What's amazing is to have to point that out. All right, hang in there. I can make it cruder. We can always go back to this, although it's imperfect. But hey, truth is, I am too. It doesn't show, I know, but I got several very unsightly warts behind my right knee. So we can use imperfect examples. Plus, some of you, by the way, don't look like you came off the cover of Vogue or GQ. How about animals? Take the highest primate, highest mammals you can imagine. Do animals, and plus we have something in common, as we know by now, not just metaphorically, as you all know, we are damn near, people don't like to, some people don't seem to care for it, but our DNA prints, sure, they come awfully close to tracking chimpanzees and attorneys. I mean, that's how close some of the lower, so-called lower life forms on this planet are. At the animal level, at the physical level, which you've got in you, there's no comment to make as far as the residual, or the ability for the human spirit, they keep on to call it that, but the ability for any creature to bounce back. If a dog is sick, he's sick. If a chimpanzee is sick, he's sick. For whatever reason, he gets well the next day or he's over his sickness, and what does he do? Now, I know he can't talk, and I know they don't seem to have a culture, but they show no signs whatsoever, not only of not talking about it since they can't talk, reminiscing about it, showing their friends that they still got the little thing, the band from being in the hospital emergency ward. But also, assuming that you're just a pretty straightforward, ordinary person, if the body, ordinary people do not do this, they're not supposed to, but some of you should be aware by now. This is the kind of thing that you need to be aware of, because it's the kind of thing that'll put the fear of Zeus back in you. It'll make you want to get on your horse and ride away to something more adventurous. to live life to the extreme. You should know by now, even though it's very difficult to live that way, that if you're sick, just a terrible, the flu, once you get over it, the body's got nothing else to say about it. If anything, the body's just glad. But if you can be aware, which it just takes a little extraordinary possible effort to be aware of the fact, you can be over it, and your mind will want to drag it out for days or hours to talk about it. You all know that. It's just the collective force of the way civilization, and it has to do with the continuity of things. That there is a continuity physically, genetically, and there is one now that appears to be psychological. This is also tied in, if you'd like to take a sidestep for a second, the kinds of things that I pointed out. The old joke, the two guys are talking, the one I made up. One guy says, oh, I see you quit smoking. Yeah? How'd you quit? I quit. Oh, no, how'd you really quit? You're not supposed to do that. Well, whatever it is. Part of, and that's the kind of thing that sometimes I know I've dragged them out, I'm getting to it a little more specifically, but it would appear to be in a way that you will think it's a joke talking about the 12-step programs, AAA or AA. I always confuse them. I always think it's people with deranged cars or something. That if you join in the middle of the night, the phone rings and it's honk honk, and there's some car that wants you that's fixing to go fill up its tank with. The ordinary life is the point that all forms of so-called self-improvement are questionable from a objective view. Because if indeed somebody was trying to improve themselves, which is just, its ordinary view is not self-improvement, it's damage control, remember that, well, yes, I quit drinking. But you don't just quit drinking. Not if you're ordinary. Jesus, no. You think about it a while, maybe years. You argue about it, which is one of the tests that they give, 10 questions to ask is that, do you think you may have a problem with alcohol? And one of them is, do you deny that you do? Which, but that's part of it. Even this thing that appears to be some self-improvement, which is just simply trying to sop the water out of your basement, damage control, you're not supposed to just jump and do it. Part of the thing is you deny for years, you argue. And they try to trick you to go to a psychiatrist or go into a hospital, do something. And then maybe you go try, and then you fall off the wagon, then you go back. It's not right or wrong. And it's not making fun of it. That is part of the game. That is part of quitting. Well, have you quit? Well, no, but I'm in the process. That's one of the other things strikes people a little funny. Well, you people laugh. Maybe it's a sympathy laugh. Ordinary people wouldn't laugh. If I got and said, well, here's a joke. Here's one you'll like. Two guys met. One says, they hadn't seen each other. One says, well, I just noticed you're not drinking. Did you quit drinking? Well, how'd you do it? I quit. Oh, no, really. How'd you do it? I quit. I would be staying here sans any positive response from a would-be comedic-oriented audience. Nobody would find that funny. Of course, especially people that think they got a drinking problem. All right, back to where we were, since it didn't seem to strike people immediately. You do understand that from a quite ordinary, sane view, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's more and more of apparent verbal importance to ordinary people, the idea of how we're trying to recover, how we're trying to better ourselves, ordinary people, and to comment on the resiliency of the human spirit, that people can just be down and by God almost out. A tornado go through and just wipe out your home. And by God, they talk to the woman, they give her time to pull herself together the next day or a few hours as soon as she quits trying to spit on the reporter. And finally they'll say, well, what do you think? And she'll say, well, I've lost everything I had. My husband got killed in it. But what are you going to do? I'm going to call my family and see if they'll come down from Tennessee and help me build, or I'll start all over. The reporter, people say, is that amazing? Look, I know it. What the hell's the choice? Except, now remember, we've got to play this game that I apparently do the dramatic, theatrical sarcasm, etc. But notice, it's become important. It's always been important, but it's of increasing importance. It's of such importance now there's already a resistance to it. There's already people now saying, well, we've gone so far, and now we got a large part of our population suffering from a syndrome of victimization that's already is pushing back. That is that there are people now who are accusing everything from the judicial system to psychologists to just society in general. Things are getting so bad, things are falling apart so fast that now no one is responsible for acting in an uncivil manner, in an illegal manner. If somebody kills their mother, they say, well, hey, my uncle used to mistreat me. If somebody is arrested for vehicular homicide, drunk driving for the 15th time in the last 2 years, they go, I was abused as a child. And that is now sometimes a workable defense. It's worth a shot. You know that. But there's now not just hotheads and soreheads just on the fringes of reality, but there are now fairly serious commentators that go, this has gone too far. Everyone's now a victim. The only reason I'm pointing this out, you understand, that's how much it's a part of civilization. I threw in one tonight when I pulled it out that made up the idea of down just so it could get going. You have to have a certain kind of dynamics or it won't work. It's the theology of physics and the physics of theology. Or I could have made the physics of psychology or the psychology of physics. But at what it would appear to be at first a more positive view of this is someone saying, is it not miraculous that the human spirit will bounce right back after a terrible tragedy? Now, we already know, we established it in the ordinary world, that is fine, it's neither here nor there, but it does serve a purpose, except for this. If you can look at it with some sort of anything resembling what would be your own best possible interest at stake, what you might get from it, is the real question is, how can it be otherwise? What kind of idiot wouldn't bounce back? And I'm being very rhetorical because they're going to bounce back anyway. I'm just trying to get you to see we're talking about physically everyone's going to bounce back. Or enough people that life keeps going. A volcano can wipe out a whole town, or 9% of the town. And if life wants the town built back, the 10% will build it back. Or it can wipe out the whole town completely. And the people right down the road, another village got saved. They weren't disturbed. And they say, well, it's just amazing. It makes you wonder why we should stay alive. And they interview the people 5 miles down the road, and everybody in that village had relatives in this one that was just wiped out, just like that. You think, God, is life unjust? Unjust. You can say that, and the people there go, and they're just crying, they're moaning, this whole other village. And reporters go back in a few days, and they're amazed. They will comment on the resilience of the human spirit, that although they were crushed and they all lost loved ones, here it is, only 2 days, well, maybe a week later, they're back to normal. What the hell's amazing about that? The point is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not at the hormonal, not the physical level. What would be amazing if it was otherwise? That if the town, the day after, the neighboring village is wiped out, now went there and said, we don't know how we're going. They're moaning, they're crying. And you go back a week later, and they're all just starving to death. They're just rendered immobile. They've all gone almost catatonic. And the reporter says, well, we went back, and people are dying literally of starvation. They're just sitting there like this. Except, if you remember, the reporter's talking to you, let's say the TV camera, and say, we were here last week right after the tragedy with their sister village that was wiped out. And the people were just in shock, crushed. Everyone in this village that we talked to had a close relative who was killed. But we thought, hell, they'd go over in a day or so, or a week or so. But look at them. Now that would be right. But they bounce back. What is the purpose of having to point that out? CF animals. CF your own animal nature, your own physical nature. Let me back up what I tried to hit before, because it sounds theoretical, but it's true. You can see it in you physically, again, assuming that you're a fairly just ordinary sane person. You get over being sick, and your body's over it. I mean, it has no memory of it, literally. You have to remind it. Or maybe somebody else does, that you were out of commission for several days at work, and you go back, and they knew you had the flu, and you come back in, and you've already been there working at your desk for an hour or so, and somebody finally comes over and says, God, I heard was that Hong Kong number 7 flu you had? I heard that was killing people. And you go, oh no, I don't know what it was. That you have to remember. Because there's not that much difference, even though strangers could say it's an imperfect comparison. I know, we've already established that. But you do see, most of you have got animals, you've been around dogs or cats, they can be just sick, to coin a phrase, as a dog. And just laying there. And they get over it, and what? They get over it. Do they come around and nudge you and try to give some kind of sign like they remember? No. And plus you don't have to look at that and wonder, is that true? It's back to you. There is no question about the resiliency of the human spirit if we're talking physically. None. That's spelled N-O just like you thought it spelled. None. There's nothing amazing. And yet notice, and it's not limited to modern psychological era, thousands of years ago, before it sounded as though it was psychological observations or comments, there was still talk about how amazing it is that humans, whole civilizations or parts of civilization could be crushed by some dominating force. That some group of barbarians come in and crush what was a burgeoning artistic, creative society, civilization, and just set on top of them. Just turn them into slaves for 50 years, 100 years, and then for whatever reason they got wiped out or they left town. And the people kind of pulled themselves together and went back. And historically, even at the time, and now even historically, they'll say, is that not amazing? What the hell's amazing? Is anybody getting the gist of that? It has to do with you personally. And it has to do with the reasons that, whatever a real warrior, a real knight is, there's nothing to support you. There's nothing to look forward to except for this. If you are destined to do that, you're going to do it whether it amounts to shit or not. There's nothing else to say. But see, everyone else is going as part of the continuity now neurally. That you are constantly sick, now not physically, although it all comes from physical. That you're sick and then you're well, or better. Then you're sick again and you're trying to get well. Then you're almost crushed over a love affair, a death in the family, financial reverses, something terrible. And then it's like, well, Jesus, I got to pull myself together and get on. No, you don't. You can lay there and die. You can tell it to somebody and they go, oh, you don't mean that. Well, sure you do. Nobody can stop you. Just stay there. Don't go out in the street with a gun and say, I'm going to kill myself, because somebody might stop you. Somebody under illusion that they should look after you. You don't have to worry. All you got to do is stay home. Be real quiet, even if you live in a small apartment. Put your head in the microwave or a gas oven. Nobody but a short-lived mutant is not going to bounce back physically. Not individually, not collectively. But now my question, and we're getting any closer to it, now my question to you, rhetorically for a reason, was why do people express, and I don't mean any individual, it's part now of the fabric of the collective life of man, psychologically, mentally. Why is it necessary to be amazed, to compliment men for the ability to carry on? Until you think about it for 3 seconds. As opposed to what? You're going to give people credit that, well, my father died. I lost my business. I spent damn 2 weeks down in the Dominican Republic drunk. I almost thought, shit, I'll just stay here. Aww. And at first I thought, hell, I would just walk out in the ocean. Nobody was here. Nobody was around. They didn't know me. I would just walk out into the waves, just overcome me, and I'd die there alone. Aww. I mean, you can. It's a free country. Well, the Dominican Republic has a certain lack of civil freedoms, but get on the beach at night, who's going to stop you, right? There's nothing funny about that, is there? It's according to whether you have a real sense of humor or not. Because a real sense of humor is informative. is that you realize, is all of this ridiculous? And then you think, well, it can't be ridiculous because the majority does it. The sane people running the world. The dressed up dunderheads that have always run everything find this to be of more and more importance. To comment on the resiliency. How great it is that we can work on ourselves. That we can come back from great adversity. Never saying my little joke about as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to going to pieces. As opposed to being very upset when it happened. Did you see that? Those people were very upset. I mean, their town was wiped out, or some individual was very upset. He lost his trailer, lost his wife. You saw the shape he was in. Well, I feel for him, yeah. But that was 2 days ago, and now he's back on his feet and back at work. Well, as opposed to what? No, I don't know. What kind of crap's that? Now back to you. We're not talking about other people. You are constantly, let me slip in one. Somewhere in there I was describing the difference, or I was saying that the mystical tradition could be seen as the difference between just passively being part of the collective and an individual insisting on being an individual. Now, it can't be in some public. It cannot be in some overt way that would have you rubbing against the weight and the force of the collective, because you'd then be an absolute dunderhead yourself, because you'd just be asking to be crushed. You're just getting crushed maybe a little piece at a time. You don't do it publicly, but it's the point that whatever the collective is doing, you've got to understand the weight of it is almost irresistible. Which is one reason some of the times I start talking about something that you don't see the point of it, or you don't see the humor, even if you think I'm being dramatically sarcastic. Because you think, well, what's the point? When I start out about the comments about the miraculous resilience of the human spirit, just that comment, just that alone, you think, what else is there to say other than, really, by God, that's true. And yet you immediately catch on that you figure, I got some kind of smart-ass comment to make, or I'm going to skew it some way or tear it apart. And at first you think, well, why or how? It is miraculous. Now, what's miraculous, I'm trying to get you to see, what's miraculous, in the broadest sense of the word miraculous, like bewildering, is why is it necessary to point out the man got up. He was knocked down on the playing field of life, blooded even. And he got up, and within a reasonable length of time, pulled himself together and got back into play. Is it amazing? That's part of the record. That is part of now, genetically, part of the human record. Isn't it amazing that we can do this? And if you told somebody, well, I saw a film clip and there was this wildebeest that tripped. And at first it looked like his leg was broken. And as far as I can tell you what, and he laid there and lines came around and it was horrible. I don't even like to talk about it. But the cameraman said that they wandered off for a couple of hours and went to film something else, and they came back. And that wildebeest had gotten up and was now trotting along, catching up with the herd on 3 feet. And if you tried to say, well, God, the miraculous resilience of the wildebeest spirit. No. And you can be the greatest animal lover in the world, because you should be the greatest animal lover with you. With you. But what's amazing about this? Now your comment, if you're following into this, and you do understand by now that it's not criticism of life and they're not wrong, but then the question is, what purpose is being served with this? Why is it necessary to feel as though we are all more and more victims? It's just coming out more and more that the more psychiatrists, in a sense they are, the sicker we get, which is not the point, of course. That's like the more attorneys we got, the more times we get sued and can sue others. I know it seems that way. Why is it there's more and more need for it to be pointed out and for us to be complimented, individually and collectively, to be complimented on the starwitness of the human, the indomitability of the human spirit. Again, as opposed to what? Well, I was knocked down. And? Well, I laid there for several days. I drank. I felt sorry for myself. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of in a hurry. What's the point? Well, don't you see? I'm now back at my post. Well, I am right. Is there a point to this? Humanity now expects. Well, it's in degrees, by the way, to see how it does expand. There's still areas, they're not that hard to find. You can find them on the news. You don't have to spend your money go looking for them physically. Areas of the world that are still almost at a subsistence level. And you never hear that. Not only do they have no psychiatrist, which is not the point, but you might notice they have no psychiatrist, no psychologist. But there is no feeling of expressing admiration of the resilience of the human spirit. They're trying to stay alive. People are starving in areas right now. And nobody says that one kid is still alive, or some woman's, she hadn't eaten in 2 weeks and she's still alive. Nobody goes, isn't that miraculous that people can bounce back? You don't even think about it. That's what I want you to see. You have to get more and more into the more civilized areas. Not just physically, which you can look at that way if you've still got that childish view. It's not just a physical movement from some area of the world that's less developed technically than we are. It's a movement in time. And it's in you also. That there is in you which are famine-struck. Hate to say it, but that's why some of you sometimes feel like, God, that's a cold, dry wind. And I don't mean that you feel it out there. It's like there's a cold, shivering wind blowing through my own attic. Why is it necessary now that men be, individual and collectively, continually stroked, encouraged, even admired? And it also has its other side, but admired to the resiliency of the human spirit. Tied to that, just sort of the other side of it, the dance partner of it, is that we are, in a sense, apparently less and less individually responsible for any ills we do have. That at times past, you could say, well, I was demon-possessed. And now, right now, circa when we're doing this, 1994, one of the most common in this part of the world is, I was abused as a child, either sexually or psychologically. Sexually is the hot one now. I've always wanted to do this, to hear about these teenage boys showing up now to show you how far life's gone downhill. I hate to say it. I'm trying to think about back when men were men, and what kind of teenage boy would show up and say that, his aunt or somebody sexually mistreated him. See, some of us can remember when, in the Wild Wild West, when things were as they should be, if you'd have heard there was some woman down the street, some adult that might mistreat sexually young teenage boys, God damn, there'd been fist fights to get down there. You think, where were these female adult sex abusers when I was a teenager? That was, just a little humor, a little joke. Back to the individual, as it always is, that there is a quite useful, very shocking, remember that pigs, regardless of the adage, pigs can fly if you stick rocket engines up their little pink asses. If you consider, why is it that I do respond to the feel, and it apparently arises from out there, that's what seems to be the stimulus, is, well, we're all kind of mistreated, we're all abused, and sometimes I do feel, I feel like I'm unloved, or I feel like I have a hard time getting into personal relationships, or I feel like I'm not successful in everything. I try to do things with my talents I thought I had. Whatever it is, you feel like, I can't seem to be appreciated in life, either financially, through recognition, through sexual relations. But it's now, instead of it in times past, it would be it was all the way from perhaps the forces of evil were against you, or you could even be demonically, if not possessed, chased. And at times past, it was even the idea back then of some genetic flaw, that there's just something wrong with me. But now, notice, and it all fits progress. You should never question that. If the ordinary people say it's progress, I don't know whoever put this plain, but I know that most of you put it together. Progress is what everybody else says is progress, not you and me. I can do it, or you should be able to do it. But whatever anybody's saying in the street, just stop. The first nice-looking man or woman you see with a power suit and briefcase, and ask them what progress is, whatever they tell you it is, that's it. That's it. Progress now is that we are not victimized in this part of the world, in this particular era. We're not victimized anymore. They're really sophisticated and civilized by demonic spirits, and certainly not by genetic flaws. No. Psychological traumas. Problems that we have had of a personal nature. But what's amazing is, by God, with the right effort and help, you can bounce back. You can bounce back, by God. Well, I know it may take a while. You mean like a lifetime? Well, yeah, maybe. Oh, good. So, I don't have to quit drinking and beating up on women now. Oh, well, certainly not. That'd be a trauma within itself. You can't just quit drinking. No. It takes a while. You got to kind of work up to it and then relapse and then work back up to it. Oh. And by so doing, that is part of, quote, the miraculous resiliency of the human spirit. Not trying to rent in the ground, but we're getting right at the end, and I just keep trying to shift it a little bit. Is you understand, and we all do, well, I'm assuming you do, I'll speak for you, that it is just nothing at all untoward or questionable for the ordinary person, the press, the ordinary view, to say, is it not amazing that this group of people, their little town was wiped out. 10 tornadoes hit it 2 weeks ago, wiped them out. It blew down their churches, their businesses, their homes. And now look at them today. They're out there all together. They're working on each other's house, and then they're having little picnics afterwards, and they're even playing a little basketball when they get tired. And you think, just look at it, and their lives were ruined. And look at the resiliency. Is there anything like the human spirit? Yeah, life. Trees, hippos, wildebeestes. Life. Why is it that man has to single himself out to be complimented on the fact of, well, he got up and lived again, lived another day? And it's like, well, let's hear it. Not only, he wasn't just wounded on the field, he didn't just turn his ankle. When they took him off, he not only turned his ankle, but as he was falling, his uncle went by and went, I always told you were a clumsy bastard. And then when they were helping him off, if that wasn't enough, his first wife went by and went, God, I'm glad I dumped you. Your ankle looks not as limp as your wine used to. And yet, next week, 6 months later, that son of a bitch is either back on the field or he's there in the ballpark with his psychiatrist over there trying to kind of pull it. Well, he's back there. He's trying. By God, he's trying. What is the purpose? What is afoot? Well, that shouldn't be that hard to see. Then the question is, can you realize how heavy that weighs? And that you can spend all of your life, back to last time, for those of you that didn't see the point, the real mystical tradition is not about getting well, it's about being well. Because getting well is a lifetime hobby. If you're getting well, you'll never be well. You'll always be in some degree of remission, relapse, falling off the wagon, figuratively and literally. And next week, well, I know. I've been working on this drinking problem, just to use that. Last week, I know, I ran off, and Jesus, it's just kind of a blur, but here it is Tuesday. And it's been 12 hours since I had a drink. And somebody, at least you, if not your psychiatrist, somebody's got some vested interest in you. Somebody, a counselor, go, God, some people, if they'd fallen off like you did and gone off for another 2-day drunk, they would have never come back in the program. And they want to hug you and pat you, the resiliency of the human spirit. Wouldn't give up. No, I wouldn't. See, if you're getting well, if you're involved with ordinary self-improvement, or if you're involved with ordinary, what amounts to drugstore, penny-ass, traditional, mystical effort, that is, by God, I got to work on this, especially I got to be sure and find the right tradition, I got to find the right system, got to get the practice down just right so I can really bounce into this and get it down. Oh, you got a hobby. It's all right. But to believe that you're doing something is a very severe, if you see it, misnomer. Because if you're involved with getting well, you never get well. But also remember, I'll try it again. There was a conversation heard at a local tango palace. One voice says, you know, people who adhere to the philosophy of I'm okay, you're okay, ain't okay. And the second voice said, yeah, but those who are bound up to any systemic mindset, any kind of philosophy, ain't okay anyway. And the first voice said, you want to dance? Because it's not, to say that the point of the traditional mystical practice, the whole point of some great secret work was not to get well, it was to be well. It is, I know, if you're an ordinary mind, very tempting to immediately jump into that I'm okay, you're okay, and what you're saying is, well, everybody, you should just take yourself as you are. Which is good we're running out of time, because that can make a merry-go-round look dizzy if I get into that. Because yes and no. But the point is, those who go, yes, I like that, it won't work for them. Is the justice. Well, I heard one good If somebody said, wait a minute, all you're saying is that the whole point of even great mystical or extraordinary effort is not to really be anything different or change, it's just to find out that you're okay. If you say that, If you think, hey, that's my kind of philosophy. Now I understand what this is. It's just so that you be satisfied for what you are. And that's the kind of people you go, well, I'll be glad I'll talk to you later. Be sure and come back. I'll be here next Tuesday, and then I'd leave town. Yeah. Because if that's the philosophy you want to adopt, if that's when you go, that's it. Now I understand. It's, I'm okay. You're not okay. Now if you say that, well, what do I say? Well, see, you already blew it. See? Because after that, it's just one step into, God, the miraculous resiliency of the human spirit. You mean you're proud and just, you're vainglorious about being alive and breathing? Well, I wouldn't put it that way. Yes, you did. Which, by the way, if you look at it another way, I'll end, has got to be surely the ultimate poster boy for stupidity. I want you to know I'm alive. Huh? Huh? Yeah. Breathe, I'm alive. Well, hey, let's hear it for the boy.